Support for Headline Humboldt is made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, a masked man with a bucket and ladle splashed Gaza protesters with paint this week as they converged on Cal Poly Humboldt to mark 1 year since the Gaza invasion. Also, Mario Fernandez from the Eureka City Council joins us to talk about the possibility of cameras tracking people's license plates across Eureka, about Measure F, and more. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. How, in this age of rampant technology, artificial intelligence, high-grade optics, and the ubiquitous presence of smartphones, do we balance liberty and the need for civil order? Given our current technology, or what's likely to develop very soon, we could almost certainly create a society where crime and malfeasance become very difficult, if not impossible. I've seen movies about that. Cameras can catch all manner of crimes. And truth be told, technology can actually be such a force multiplier as to nearly render patrolling officers and beat cops leftover relics from the bobbies of London. But is that our community? How do we preserve a sense of belonging and freedom in a space where everyone is monitored or accountable to an eye in the sky? I'm actually asking. I don't have a stern opinion here, except to say that I know there is a limit to what we'll deal with as a society in terms of monitoring or surveillance. But where is that line? It's a discussion that has currency, as the city of Eureka weighs deploying a camera system to potentially track license plates across the city as a means of fighting crime. I get the utility of it all and don't necessarily oppose such a move, but it absolutely necessitates a much broader discussion, one that should set out a statement of principles before moving too far along that kind of path. Eureka City Councilman Mario Fernandez will join us shortly to discuss that issue and others. But first, the news. A man who was seen assaulting several people at Cal Poly Humboldt this week by splashing them with paint from a bucket is now being sought by police. The University Police Department is now asking for the public's assistance in identifying the individual, seen here in this photo, who allegedly committed the assaults at around 12:30 p.m. Monday on the University Quad. The incidents were reported by students and a community member and are now under investigation. The individual was last seen wearing a purple hooded sweatshirt, yellow coat, and black pants, throwing paint from a ladle, according to witnesses. Anyone with information is asked to contact the University Police Department at 826-5555. And speaking of technological enforcement, tips can now be submitted through the Rave Guardian app, as well as available on Google Play on Apple Store. We'll be right back with Councilman Mario Fernandez.
Get ready to bid on your dream vacation. Our exclusive travel auction is coming and registration is opening now. Bidding begins November 17th and ends on the 23rd. But don't wait. Secure your spot today. Exotic escapes, thrilling adventures, and unbelievable memories are just a bit away. Share the excitement with your friends and mark your calendars. Everyone's invited to join on this adventure, so tell your friends, register now.
Who's gonna tell you things aren't so?
As our world has advanced, so have our modes of transportation. But our favorite vehicles eventually have to go somewhere.
You can't go on.
By donating your used car, truck, motorcycle, or RV to your local PBS station, you can make room to upgrade your wheels. Don't wait. Go online and make your donation now.
Who's gonna drive you home?
We're joined now in studio by Councilman Mario Fernandez. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Real quick, I wanted to announce some sad news. Earlier today, we got a press release that announced the death of Noni the bear from Sequoia Park Zoo. It sounds like she was choking, I guess, or something along those lines. The press release states, on the afternoon of Wednesday, October 9th, Noni was rushed to another emergency surgery to evaluate the severity of her condition. Even after the constriction had been removed and despite the life-saving efforts of her care team, it was discovered that the trauma to her colon was irreversible and the organ had been unable to recover. Oh. Do I have that wrong?
This is similar to what we heard, and we got a little bit of a heads up about it last night. It's unfortunate, but it is one of those acts of nature, and the compassion that the zoo had taken on by adopting the two bears.
Yeah.
least it's a good resting place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they had just adopted her, I guess, in 2022 after it was orphaned, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sad news, but I wanted to get that out of the way and let people know, because I know that people are, attached to the bear. But thank you for joining us, Mario. So the reason why I asked you on this week, on the surface at least, to begin the discussion, is the surveillance question. The Chief of Police, Brian Stevens, gave a presentation at the board where he was basically saying there is a company called Flock Safety, and there is the possibility of having automated license plate identification cameras, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And you guys heard the presentation and then made some decisions about that, and we'll get to that. But first, let's hear what Chief Brian Stevens had to say about the proposal and how he feels like it could help the city with enforcement.
As the Chief of Police, you've entrusted me with the safety and security of our city, our citizens, and those that come to the city to enjoy things we have to offer. In our current day and age we currently live in, policing looks different than it did 10, 15, 20 years ago. Technology dominates our lives, from the appliances in our homes to the computers in our workplaces to the cell phones and many computers we each carry with us every day. It's not as easy to police as it was. We can't just put officers on the street. We can't put them on foot and expect that we're going to get the results that we want or the results that we may have seen 20 years ago. Don't get me wrong, we'll always need officers on the street. They always will need to be out there, responding to calls and being as proactive as time allows to change the unwanted behaviors that affect our quality of life and to intervene when the evil knocks at our door. I'll talk about that later tonight when our staffing, and give you an update on that and the issues that we face, as well as other agencies across the state and honestly the country when it comes to officer recruitment and retention. But as the chief, and how I'm going to police our community and our detectives and the officers, I need to provide them with the highest level of service to our city. One way is through technology. This is why I'm bringing this presentation to you this evening. The technology and services the Flock LPR cameras will bring to our city and our region will be crime-fighting tools that will have direct and meaningful impacts on our ability to further police the city and bring further safety to our community members. We aim to leverage the use of the LPR technology for the good of the public, using it as a reactive measure to solve crimes and keep the community safe. I have two main objectives we hope to gain from the placement and implementation of this technology. The first is crime fighting, of course, locating wanted vehicles and persons, as well as abducted or kidnapped citizens and children, and other alerts such as silver alerts, so we may be able to get somebody back home to their loved ones. We'll be able to recover a higher number of stolen vehicles and get them back to their owners quickly. We will be able to locate vehicles associated with crimes committed in our region quicker. We can use this technology as an investigative tool to further investigations after a crime has been committed within our city, giving our investigators quicker leads and reduce the time a suspect is potentially on the loose to victimize others in our community. The second objective I have, and I believe we will be able to accomplish, is these cameras will become a deterrent for criminal activity that involves a vehicle in our city. Let's make it well known that the city has this technology and will use it to catch you if you decide to commit a crime with a vehicle in our city. This technology truly has the capability to be a force multiplier for EPD.
So, I mean, obviously, everyone's aware that the Eureka City Police Department, like a lot of police departments, is struggling with staffing issues and recruitment and retention and all that. So this would definitely be a way to perhaps help with that. But what was your response in hearing the chief's presentation, and then from Jonathan Paz from Flock, who also sort of elaborated on what the proposal looked like? What do you think?
So first and foremost, our staffing levels are improving. Okay. I can't, and it's unfortunate because I can't give you the concrete numbers, but I know that they've gone up. There's still room for improvement, but they have increased. Hearing Chief Stevens' reasoning, I'm of the mind that I want to utilize technology creatively. You're never going to hear me say, no, absolutely not. It's like, how can we use it and make it more ubiquitous? How can we utilize it in a safe manner? For me, and seems like for the rest of the council, actually.
You guys were clear.
I was a bit surprised because as I've told folks in the community, when Councilmember Moulton had started, and then it was Councilmember Contreras-Deloche, and then it was Councilmember Bauer, it felt like I didn't have an opportunity to ask questions because they'd already been asked.
They covered them.
Quite expertly, quite adroitly, I think. And so it was just a matter of how can we utilize this as a benefit in our community without the concerns for safety being put to the wayside. And so it largely came down to an issue of privacy and implementation. And there are arguments against the privacy of people in the general public, but when you're looking at 30 days worth of storage, when you're looking at the potential for these these videos or these images being kept in a cloud in another state under someone else's auspice.
Yeah, some corporation may have access and ownership, basically, for a while of that material.
Yeah. And so when Councilmember Moulton had asked in what was a more roundabout way, because I think I had driven it home from my perspective, saying if someone comes from, i.e. the state of Georgia, seeking health care here, particularly for an abortion, and there's a request now from Georgia for our information, which we've said in California or our city, absolutely not, but they request it from Flock for their servers in Florida.
Yeah.
And so it was, felt a bit disingenuous from the folks from Flock to say, well, are you asking a hypothetical? It's like, well, that's typically what a question is.
Yeah, yeah. And
because this hasn't been.
Because none of these situations arise, and they won't until we approve this, and whether or not we're going to approve it depends on how you answer these questions.
Right.
I mean, really, right? I mean, like, and that's, yeah, I understand that. And that's a rather bleak scenario, but I mean, given the way that a lot of these states that are anti-abortion have been acting, that's very realistically something someone could ultimately request, and that would be terrible. You know?
Right, and that's a concern. And if you go back and you look at comments from the ACLU or even a white paper they had published in 2022, the concerns around citizenship status or residency, those are prevailing issues, with comments coming from Flock employees at the higher end saying that if that's what's legal in this particular state, that's how we'll comply.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, but if it's not an issue in California, but it's an issue for another particular state, then
exactly, where do you fall down on that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I can see the chief's perspective of this would be a force multiplier, and I think you had hit on it earlier, saying this might be able to do away with the beat cops of old. But I like the idea of having officers that know their community.
Absolutely.
So if they're going to be doing a beat, I'd rather have them present than behind a screen, because at least we know who they are.
Exactly right. And there's a person and a relationship that develops, rather than there just being this invisible authority who may or may not intercede in your life at any time for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's scary, potentially. But so, I mean, you guys got this presentation, and like we were talking earlier before the show, I guess the sheriff's office has already done this to some extent. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I guess apparently they're not near the ingresses and egresses of the city, but they are neighboring the city. Does that raise any concerns for you, or what are your thoughts?
That actually hasn't come to us, and I don't recall getting a heads up on that. Again, that's an administrative function of the county.
Yeah.
That is something that I know that Eureka Police Department likes to point to, which is like, this is how we were able to remedy the stolen pride flag. We were able to utilize the camera and the images, and it's like, okay, that's great that we had those, but there had been an act, there had been a crime, someone had observed that, at least from the Flock camera, and so for me it's just the logistics of how soon after were we able to identify that, because was it 72 hours, was it a week? And so for us, some of those retention policies are for our concern, at least as a city.
Absolutely.
I don't know what the policy is for the county, so it's difficult for me to speak to that from an informed perspective.
Yeah. It's interesting questions, though.
Yeah.
And it seems like maybe there should have been a public airing of this kind of thing prior, and maybe that discussion can proceed now that people are more aware. So where does it stand now? I mean, you guys referred it, but I mean, basically, there's going to be another layer of review from folks whose job it is to review police practices, right?
Yeah, the Committee on Police Practices, our COP committee, lovingly named. And so I believe our city attorney is going to take a review of our concerns and see what maybe amendments she can make to the policy, and then present that. So I'm still a little loose on what that might look like, but I know that she had asked for a first pass before it going to the COP committee. And so that was, I think, a recommendation from Councilmember Moulton. I thought that was fantastic, because that's why we have it. Since it's going to be police procedure, since it should require some oversight from that committee and its best implementation.
And the people who are on there are interested in the subject of policing more broadly, and they're looking out for abuses and that kind of thing. It seems like the perfect fit for an entity that's relatively new, and this is an important discussion, you know, so it seems like a good way to make them relevant into the processes of that moving forward. But real quick, I mean, just on the broad discussion of, like, I get that we have this technology now, and we're only going to get more and more technology with the advent of AI, which I kind of keep, that's my, I keep beating it with a stick, because that's going to change a lot of things. It would be nonsensical not to implement those things in some way, but we have to be very careful about what we allow to happen, because it could quickly grow out of control and turn into something that is really, really unfortunate. And so, I think that's important. I think that's what you're saying too.
Well, yeah, and I think those were some of the concerns highlighted by the ACLU. They pointed to a few incidents where the AI had been responsible in reporting a particular vehicle from out of state, not here, but the license plate matched, or the license plate number matched, but was from a different vehicle. And so, yeah,
wow.
Those are the things that we have to be aware of, which is why one of the questions I'd asked, is there going to be a review by a human being? The answer was yes. And so it's what we need to be asking then is, from the AI model's perspective, are we talking about a 95% confidence? Are we talking about 98% confidence? Because, even with the best intents of technology, we're not going to be at 100%.
Yeah.
So what can make us be our best, as we still utilize human beings to fulfill the functions to make sure that we don't land in these type of traps.
Yeah. And real quick, my son asked me a question and I didn't actually have the ready answer. Are there cameras on red lights now on any of the intersections in Eureka?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, well,
and I would hope that we would be informed.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
But it's something that looks like a camera, especially on the Harris and West intersection, or S intersection, and it looks like a little camera. And he thought that it was a red light camera, where if you run the red light, you'll get a ticket in the mail. And I'm like, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so, because there has to be postings for that. And I know the state's allowing some trials in other cities. I don't believe we were picked.
Yeah.
If anything, that might be like a traffic flow monitor,
Gotcha.
or when the light needs to change, is there a vehicle here? So it might be a sensor.
Yeah, exactly right. To make sure the flow is good and steady.
And you'd said Harris and
Harris and S.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't have to be as careful with that stoplight. Just kidding, folks.
Well, I would hope you still be cautious.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. We'll be right back. We're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Measure F and the election. So don't miss out.
Every car has a story. Why not write a new chapter for it when you donate your vehicle to our station? Leave a lasting legacy when you turn your car into support for the programs you love. Do something good while freeing up space in the garage. Donating is simple, the pickup is free, and your gift is tax deductible. Write that new chapter today. Call or donate online.
Registration is now open for our exclusive travel auction. Your dream getaway is just a bit away, so don't miss a chance to explore breathtaking destinations. While bidding doesn't start until November 17th, you can register today to ensure that you're all set when the bidding begins. Head over to the auction site to get more information about these fantastic adventures. And remember, anyone can join in on the excitement. So spread the word, invite your friends, and be part of the adventure.
We're back in studio. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming back. So the election, obviously people are keenly observing. We're going to have some candidate forums, which we'll give some more information about coming up. But Measure F, that's the big high-ticket item this year. And real quick, it's got some provisions in it that seem relatively innocuous, in that it's like zoning, stuff, and it's basically going to make it so that parking lots that are parking lots now will remain parking lots, or at least preserve those spaces into the future. That seems relatively innocuous. People are like, that's we need to preserve our parking.
Yeah, let's pick the most boring topic that has probably one of the biggest impacts on housing and working class folks in Eureka.
Well, yeah, and that's like, I was mentioning that we did a show a couple weeks ago where we talked about R1 zoning and the history of that. People don't necessarily realize that those kinds of decisions and that kind of policy absolutely shapes how we live our lives, and even to some extent how our society functions. So those small changes can be problematic. You're on the record as opposing Measure F. Real quick,
correct.
What are your fears if Measure F were to pass?
Well, I think it's already been documented in the Lost Coast Outpost going on for a few months now, whether it was coming from a nonprofit that has interests in housing development and seeing it done as best as it can. And then, of course, just earlier this week, I think maybe yesterday, from the California Department of Housing and Community.
California Department of Housing and Urban Development, Melinda Coy.
Yeah, thank you. And so saying that this would not be implemented straight away, and it's like, oh, okay, that's a little concerning. Because if we take it all the way back, I feel like this measure was done in bad faith. That's not saying that the proponents, the people who went out and gotten the initiatives, are bad people. It's just that if there had been more of an opportunity to discuss and negotiate, particularly in an open forum about what they want to see, rather than doing this, we probably could have come up with a better solution, or at least some sort of compromise. But to go this way, I think is, the initiative process is there. I think this is probably an egregious overstep of it. They got the appropriate amount of signatures, sure, but there are people who feel like they had, again, talking to community members anecdotally, had been duped. That being said, just the issue with F is that, as they say, it won't deter any of the current projects, so as long as they're willing to one for one preserve those parking spaces. So how are we going to do that if not underground or above ground with the housing built on top? Anything that I've looked at has said that in order to do that, it's going to cost about $30,000 a space, which would add, if you have 60...
$30,000 a space?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's what I've heard from staff. That's what I've seen from No on Measure F. The concern there then is like, okay, if we tack this on to a development for a developer, the odds of them offering low-income housing is further away at that point. And we have to have those housing, particularly for low-income houses, for low-income folks, working-class folks, we have to have those numbers in place to abide by the state. If for whatever reason we don't fulfill our housing element as dictated to us by the state, we're out of compliance. The worst-case scenario is they then come in with the builder's remedy, which says that they approve who the developer is and they see fit to what the project is. So regardless of our limitations here in town, it's going to be dictated by the developer and the state. So that's not to say that, there might not be some way to work it out, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't build a 5, 6, 7-story building saying, here we go, it's going right here, smack down in the middle of town.
And we lose local control. All of the citizens who would show up at hearings may be disaffected as well from the process. It sounds like an ugly remedy, and that's obviously what you want to avoid.
And to go further into Measure F with the stipulations around Jacobs, I feel that is misleading to the point of, this would be fantastic if the city had any control over Jacobs, which we don't.
No, real quick, just so people are aware, it wants to change it so that the zoning at Jacobs would allow all kinds of uses, but in particular low-income and other-income housing projects there, right?
At a minimum of 40% for housing, and the rest being by right. So.
And so, is that local control issue the main concern then there, or like not having a say?
With Jacobs, it's more an issue of we should have had better relationships with the school board. That goes both ways at the end of the day. And of course, I served on the school board, and I don't think it's any secret at this point that back in 2022, when we first had discussions about this, it was an offer of $2.9 million from the city to the school board. School board had asked, well, $4 million, and then it just fell apart. And it's like, but we need to negotiate. That's how these things are done.
Starting offer.
And I don't think it's from an issue of like we need, or we want money, we're greedy. It's like we have to do right by the students.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But at the same time, how does that impact the students in the larger community? Like I get it. We need this for our school sites, but at the same time, if we're sending them back to their homes, where are their homes?
Exactly.
How are those homes being built? Where are they built?
Well, that's an interesting point too. It's like when these decisions get made, which is another argument for local control, that's the kind of like impact and ramifications that you have to consider with these things, because there are multiple like layers of consequence that have to be considered in order to make sound planning decisions. And that is something that I think only local bodies and locally invested folks can responsibly do, or even be aware of what a lot of those implications are.
Right. So it's like you're saying, we would lose that local control in the worst case scenario. And then to say, going back to when we were talking briefly for that moment about zoning, the history of zoning, and I'll say very candidly that it's steeped in racism just because it came out of out of Atlanta, Georgia in the 1920s.
And it was in response to the Great Migration, and as I said at the end, in that story, R1 zoning might as well stand for racism, because that's exactly what it was for, was to keep the community segregated after the Supreme Court said that race was no longer available for that use. So they changed it to something else, and here we go. And that stayed the same.
Right. And so is Measure F racist in its intent? No, but the underlying theme being that we don't want poor working class folks in Old Town, so we need to move them over here in the south end of Eureka.
And where there is a lot of economically challenged folks, that's sort of what you would call, I guess, the more challenged end of town, that in the south. So keep them together, right? That's sad.
Well, and then there are arguments to be made for parking, and I understand the concerns with that. And for me, that means then we need to reevaluate what that means for our people with disabilities. So we have ADA accessible parking, as well as microtransit. We need to make better investments there.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, again, it's one of those things that has all these complexities, and to do so by an initiative and to gather signatures, maybe with doing it by misleading folks, all of that's the wrong approach. It needs to be something that is very organically grown and considered from all kinds of angles.
Well, I mean, we saw similar overreach with Measure A back in the primary.
Yeah. All right, well, that's pretty much all I had for you. Real quick, who are you supporting for council? I don't think it's a big secret.
For Wards 2 and 4, respectively, it's going to be Katie Moulton and Scott Bauer.
Okay, well, great. I appreciate you coming down and for talking about these issues.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure. So that's it for tonight, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. Real quick, if you haven't seen it yet, I'd like you to check out our podcast, Neon Galactic. That's at youtube.com/@neongalactic for some fascinating and otherworldly kinds of conversations. I probably challenge your ontologies. You can look up that word if you want. I'm not sure I know what it means, but it's it's on any of your usual podcast platforms as well. Also, this next week on Monday and Wednesday, we have candidate forums. Eureka City Council will be the 2nd and 4th Ward. That's Monday, October 14th at 7 p.m. And then we'll have the California State Assembly District 2 on Wednesday, October 15th at 7 p.m. So I encourage people to check those out. Real quick, Mario, before the show you were talking about how high pressure those debates can be. What was your memory of your time in the candidate forums with the League of Women Voters?
I can say in hindsight that I enjoyed it, but when you're there in that moment, it's like, oh, okay, this has to be really crafted. And if you recall, I have my sheet of paper, I have my pen, and I have maybe a few things scribbled down, particularly my introduction and my conclusion. And you're making notes as fast as you can, but when it goes right back to you at the start, you're like, okay, I hope I get asked a question I know the answer to, otherwise there's going to be a lot of improvisation here.
Yeah, exactly right. And like you were saying, you had 4 candidates during yours, and these people are going to be one-on-one. So they're going to be responsible for a full
half hour
themselves, and that's going to be a challenge for them, for sure. But anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week. Stay tuned. Stay informed.